You're not a perfectionist, you're just terrified of your potential. Carl Jung. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Why do you keep editing that email over and over before sending it? Why do you rewrite the caption on your post 10 times and then delete the whole thing altogether? Why do you obsess about the phrasing of a single sentence, the color of your shirt in a picture, or the exact timing of when to speak, act, or create? You say it's because you're a perfectionist. But what if I told you that's a lie? A seductive, socially acceptable lie. What if the real reason isn't that you're obsessed with perfection, but that you're absolutely terrified of what might happen if you truly unleashed your potential? Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But there's a hidden trap in that idea. Because to become who you truly are, you have to face the terrifying possibility that you might be capable of much more than you've allowed yourself to believe. And that's not just exciting, it's paralyzing. If you're like most of us, somewhere deep inside, you already know you're playing small. You know you're holding something back. And ironically, that inner awareness doesn't make you feel empowered, it makes you feel fractured, stuck between the person you are and the person you could be. That tension is what we hide behind perfectionism.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
But perfectionism isn't about high standards. It's about fear. Fear of being seen. Fear of being judged. Fear of taking a shot and realizing that even your best might not be enough. Or worse, that it is enough and then you'd have to change your entire life. Because if you really went for it, if you really gave yourself permission to be the fullest version of yourself, then you'd have no more excuses. You'd have to break up with the familiar discomfort of self-doubt and step into the unknown wilderness of your real power. That's not something most of us are taught how to do. We're taught to polish the mask, not to remove it. So we say, "I'm just a perfectionist." We say, "I can't start yet, it's not ready." We say, "One day when I've figured everything out, then I'll go all in." But that day never comes, because perfection is a moving target. And your subconscious knows if you chase perfection, you never have to risk failure. You can stay safe in your little loop of almosts and maybes. You can convince yourself you're working hard, when in reality you're just avoiding the real work, confronting your own potential. Now, here's the paradox. We think we avoid our potential because we're afraid of failure. But Jung suggested something deeper. He proposed that we fear our own greatness more than our mediocrity. And this fear manifests as procrastination, self-sabotage, imposter syndrome, and yes, perfectionism. Because what would happen if you wrote that book, started that business, had that conversation, launched that idea, or finally told the truth about who you are? Would your friends still recognize you? Would your family still accept you? Would your own identity survive the transformation? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Many of us cling to perfectionism because it gives us an identity that feels virtuous and safe. We get to be the person who cares deeply, who doesn't settle, who wants to get it right. But underneath that noble mask is a fear of action. Because action creates consequences. Action makes things real. And if you make it real, and it's not enough, or worse, if it is enough, then you're suddenly accountable to a new version of yourself. One who doesn't get to hide anymore. Let me ask you a question that might keep you up tonight. What if your obsession with doing things perfectly is just a way to avoid doing them at all? We've all heard some variation of the idea that done is better than perfect. but we rarely explore the implications of that idea in our inner lives. When you finish something, you have to confront its reality. You have to let go. You have to move on. But perfectionism allows you to stay in limbo, a place where you never have to test your real limits, never have to risk full exposure, and never have to face the possibility that you're not who you pretend to be, but also never get to discover who you really are. Jung believed that the most terrifying thing is not the darkness inside us, but the light. The untapped, unclaimed brilliance we bury beneath layers of fear, self-doubt, and false humility. He called this the shadow, but not just the dark parts of us. Our shadow also contains the gold of our potential. And when you run from your potential, you're not just playing it safe. You're rejecting the very essence of your being. So let me ask you again, are you really a perfectionist, or are you just scared of what might happen if you finally stopped hiding? Because here's what I've learned, both as someone who's chased impossible dreams and as someone who's stood in front of millions of people trying to make something meaningful. The world doesn't need you to be perfect. It needs you to be real, to be raw, and to be willing to show up messy, unfinished, and uncertain, and still take the next step. Because that's where transformation lives. Not in the flawless execution of an idea, but in the vulnerable act of showing up anyway. You're not a perfectionist. You're just scared of your potential. And that's okay. We all are. But the real question is, what are you going to do with that fear? The shadow side of excellence, why you're addicted to control. Let's talk about control. Not the obvious kind where you micromanage people or obsess over your calendar, but the quiet, inner kind. The kind that looks like discipline, but is actually a defense mechanism. The kind that hides behind productivity apps and color-coded to-do lists. The kind that masks itself as standards and focus, when in truth, it's just your way of avoiding the raw chaos of potential. Because here's the paradox, the more control you seek, the more you're actually trying to guard yourself from the uncontrollable force of your own becoming. Carl Jung didn't view human potential as a pleasant journey up a hill. He saw it as a descent into the unknown, a confrontation with the unconscious, with the parts of yourself you've buried deep. And one of those buried parts is the version of you that could radically transform your life if you stopped managing every little detail and just let go. But letting go feels like death. Because when you've built your identity around being the one who always gets it right, surrendering control feels like dismantling the very structure that keeps you safe. So we become addicted to excellence. We chase the high of getting it right, of being applauded, of being seen as competent and composed. But it's not really about growth, it's about survival. It's about maintaining the illusion that if we can just do everything perfectly, we'll avoid rejection, pain, and failure. We think if we can control the outcome, we can finally feel worthy. But here's the truth, worth doesn't come from control. It comes from courage, and courage demands that we act before we feel ready. Ask yourself this, what are you really trying to control by perfecting everything? Is it the outcome? The opinions of others? Your own sense of inadequacy? What would happen if you stopped trying to control every variable and just allowed things to unfold? Are you afraid that what's inside you might actually be powerful enough to change your life? That maybe you wouldn't be able to handle what comes next? People often think perfectionists are overachievers. But most perfectionists are underachievers in disguise. Why? Because they never let themselves finish. They get stuck in the loop of revision, of doubt, of needing more time. They don't launch the business, they don't pitch the idea, They don't publish the poem because as long as the thing is unfinished, their identity is safe. They can still pretend they could be great without ever having to prove it. That's the real addiction, the addiction to potential without risk. The comfort of knowing you could be something without ever testing whether you actually are. This is the shadow side of excellence. It looks admirable on the outside, but is often driven by fear on the inside. The fear of being exposed, the fear of being ordinary, the fear that you are not enough without your achievements. So you cling to perfectionism like a shield, hoping that if you can just do everything right, no one will ever see the cracks in your armor. But here's the irony: the cracks are where the light gets in. The cracks are where your real power lives. Jung believed that true individuation, the process of becoming your full self, requires us to integrate the shadow. That means facing not just your insecurities, but your strengths. Not just your darkness, but your brilliance. And brilliance is terrifying, because once you acknowledge it, you have no excuse not to act. You can't keep waiting for the perfect moment. You can't keep blaming circumstances. You can't keep telling yourself the story that you're not ready. You have to leap, and that leap will never feel safe. Because stepping into your potential means relinquishing control. It means trusting something deeper than your ego, something wild, mysterious, and alive. It means accepting that you might fail, that you might be misunderstood, that you might have to reinvent everything. But it also means you'll finally be free. Free from the prison of perfectionism. Free from the addiction to control. Free to create, to risk, to become. So I'll ask you again, are you really committed to excellence, or are you just trying to avoid the fear of not being in control? Because here's the secret: your potential doesn't live in your ability to control outcomes. It lives in your ability to surrender to the process. Control is comfortable, but comfort is the enemy of transformation. And if you're watching this, I bet you're not here to play small. I bet there's a part of you that's tired of polishing the mask. A part that's yearning to break free, not just to impress others, but to finally meet yourself. The prison of potential, why you're afraid of who you could become. There's a strange kind of pain that comes from knowing you're capable of more but not doing anything about it. It's not loud, it's not dramatic. It's quiet, persistent, and corrosive. It sits beneath your to-do lists, behind your habits, and under your daily distractions. It's the ache of unrealized potential. And if you've ever felt it, that gnawing sense that you're meant for something greater, you know it's not just a motivational poster quote. It's a haunting, a kind of psychic tension between who you are and who you could be. But here's the paradox: we think we're frustrated because we haven't reached our potential. But often we're paralyzed because deep down we're terrified of what reaching it would require. And even more terrifying, what it would change. Because becoming the person you're capable of being means letting go of the person you've always been. That's not just a mindset shift, it's an identity death. Carl Jung wrote that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. What if your so-called fate, the job you tolerate, the relationships you settle for, the patterns you keep repeating, isn't fate at all? What if it's just you refusing to confront the truth of your own power? Because here's what no one tells you: potential is not a gift. It's a burden, a responsibility, a calling. And ignoring it doesn't make it go away, it just makes you suffer. When we say we're afraid of failure, we're often lying to ourselves in a very convincing way. What we're really afraid of is success. Not success in the shallow, external sense, but success in the sense of becoming fully, dangerously alive. Because real success demands sacrifice. It demands that you demolish the comfortable narratives you've built to keep yourself small. It demands that you stop asking for permission and start living with consequences. And most terrifying of all, it demands that you become someone new. That's why so many of us stay trapped in the prison of potential. Because in that prison we still have hope. We can still say, one day. We can still fantasize about the version of ourselves who writes the book, starts the movement, finds the courage. And as long as we don't actually do it, that fantasy remains intact. But the moment we act, the fantasy dies and reality begins. That's the real fear. Not that we'll fail, but that we'll succeed and have to carry the weight of that success. Here's something most people never ask themselves: are you willing to be misunderstood? Because stepping into your potential doesn't just threaten your comfort, it threatens your relationships, your environment, your identity. But people who knew the old you may not recognize the new you. They may resent you. They may try to pull you back. And you might be tempted to go back, not because you were happier there, but because at least it was familiar. But growth is a betrayal of the familiar, and potential, once activated, sets fire to everything that kept you small. This is what Jung saw when he explored the human psyche, not just our traumas and fears, but our brilliance and boldness. And he understood something vital, that the deeper fear isn't of our shadow, it's of our light. Because if you're truly powerful, if you're truly capable of becoming something extraordinary, then you no longer have the luxury of mediocrity. You can't blame the system. You can't blame your parents. You can't blame your past. You have to take responsibility. And responsibility is terrifying. So we stay in the prison. We decorate it. We make it look productive. We fill it with endless improvement strategies and self-help books and someday goals. But deep down, we're just hiding from the cost of becoming. Because becoming isn't free. It will cost you your comfort, your certainty, your excuses, and your old self. But here's the truth that makes it all worth it. Your potential isn't just about what you do. It's about who you are when you stop hiding. You were never meant to stay in the waiting room of your own life. You were meant to walk into the fire of transformation and come out forged, not perfect but real. And somewhere inside you, you already know this. You feel the tension. You hear the whisper. You sense the call. The question is, will you answer it? Becoming the flame, why real freedom demands you let go of who you've been. There's a moment in every meaningful journey where you stop asking, what should I do? And start asking, who must I become? And this is where the real fear sets in, not the fear of failure, not the fear of judgment, but the fear of obliteration. Because to become the next version of yourself, the current version has to die. And that's not metaphor, it's psychological truth. The part of you that built your current life cannot build the life you're being called to. It doesn't have the tools. It wasn't designed for that world. So it must burn. Carl Jung understood this better than most. He taught that transformation is always preceded by destruction, and that the psyche doesn't evolve through comfort, but through crisis. We want to believe that we can gently grow into our highest selves, that we can tweak a few habits, shift a few thoughts, and slide into greatness. But the self doesn't evolve through minor edits. It evolves through fire, through confrontation, through letting go. And that's where perfectionism becomes a kind of spiritual avoidance, because it keeps you in the realm of editing when life is asking you to rewrite the whole book. Freedom isn't having everything figured out. It's the willingness to step into the unknown without needing to. True freedom is giving up the illusion that you can control the outcome and instead committing to the integrity of the process. It's being willing to be seen as foolish, messy, unfinished, and still moving forward. It's realizing that becoming who you truly are will never feel safe, but it will always feel right. And that's the difference between a life of quiet regret and a life of radical aliveness. But here's the catch: as long as you cling to who you've been, even if that person is competent, admired, accomplished, you can't become who you're meant to be. Because that earlier version of you was built for survival, not expansion. It was built to protect, not to create. And now, that shell is too tight. It's suffocating you. That's why you feel anxious even when things are going well. That's why you feel restless even when you're succeeding. Because the soul doesn't care about safety. It cares about expansion. Ask yourself this: what part of you needs to die so that something truer can live? Maybe it's your need to be liked. Maybe it's your obsession with being right. Maybe it's the story you keep telling yourself about why you're not ready. Maybe it's your attachment to an identity that once served you but now chains you. Whatever it is, the longer you hold on, the more you'll suffer. Because growth doesn't ask for your comfort, it asks for your commitment. And commitment means letting go of the known in order to step into the infinite. Becoming the flame means embracing the burn. It means allowing the fire of transformation to consume everything false, everything outdated, everything small. But it means trusting that what remains, what survives the fire, is the part of you that's real. But the part of you that's always been waiting. The part of you that doesn't need to be perfect, only whole. So no, you're not a perfectionist. That's just the story you've used to avoid the terrifying, beautiful truth. You are powerful beyond measure, and that power comes with a price. The price is the death of who you were. The reward is the birth of who you are becoming. And if you're brave enough to step into the fire, you'll discover something that no amount of control, approval, or perfection could ever give you: freedom. Now ask yourself, honestly, are you willing to become the flame? Because the world is not waiting for your perfection. It's waiting for your presence.